Now let us study one of the most innovative plays written by John Dryden, Marriage à la Mode, published in 1672. This play is special because Dryden does something very unusual. Instead of writing only one story, he writes two different stories inside the same play. That is why this slide is called split plot dynamics. The word split means divided. The word plot means the story. So, a split plot simply means two separate stories running side by side in one play. At first, these stories seem completely unrelated. They have different characters, different moods, different styles of language, and even different purposes. But by the end of the play, both stories teach the audience the same lesson. This is Dryden's genius. He creates variety without losing unity. Now let us understand both plots one by one. The tragicomedy. Let us first look at the story on the left side of the slide. This is the tragicomedy. Before we understand its features, let us understand what tragicomedy actually means. The word is made up of two words, tragedy and comedy. A tragedy usually ends with suffering or death. A comedy usually ends with happiness, marriage, or celebration. A tragicomedy combines both. It has serious situations, danger, political conflicts, romantic love, and emotional tension, but instead of ending in disaster, it finally reaches a happy conclusion. So the audience experiences fear and hope at the same time. The first point says, idealistic, romantic love. This means the lovers believe that love is pure, sacred, and more valuable than power or wealth. They are willing to suffer, to sacrifice, and even to risk their lives for true love. For example, imagine a prince who truly loves a princess. Even if he loses his kingdom, he refuses to abandon her. This kind of faithful and selfless love is called idealistic romantic love. Dryden presents love here as something noble and honorable. The next point says, features usurpers, lost nobles, and heroic couplets. Let us understand these three ideas separately. First, usurpers. A usurper is a person who takes the throne illegally. He is not the rightful king. He gains power through force, deception, or betrayal. Such characters create political conflict and suspense. Second, lost nobles. This is a favorite idea in Renaissance drama. Sometimes a prince or princess is separated from the royal family during childhood. Years later, their true identity is discovered, and they regain their rightful position. This creates surprise, emotion, and a satisfying ending. Third, heroic couplets. Dryden uses rhyming couplets in the serious scenes. Why? Because rhyme sounds formal, grand, and majestic. It suits kings, queens, heroes, and royal courts. The elevated language matches the elevated characters. The final point says, heavily influenced by the Fletcherian tradition. Who was Fletcher? John Fletcher was one of the most popular dramatists after Shakespeare. He became famous for writing tragicomedies. His plays often contain romance, adventure, mistaken identities, political conspiracies, and happy endings after many difficulties. Dryden admired Fletcher greatly. Therefore, the serious story in Marriage à la Mode clearly follows Fletcher's dramatic tradition. The comedy of manners. Now let us move to the second plot shown on the right side. This is called the comedy of manners. This is completely different from the first plot. Instead of kings and kingdoms, this plot shows fashionable society. Instead of political battles, it focuses on love, marriage, friendship, and social relationships. Instead of heroic speeches, it gives us clever conversations full of wit. The first point says, cynical, sophisticated, and witty. Let us understand these words. Cynical means the characters do not believe that people are always honest or sincere. They often suspect selfish motives behind love and friendship. Sophisticated means they are educated, fashionable, refined, and skilled in social behavior. They know how to dress, how to speak, and how to impress others. Witty means they speak intelligently and humorously. Their conversations are fast, clever, and entertaining. Many jokes come not from funny situations, but from brilliant dialogue. This sparkling conversation became one of the greatest attractions of Restoration comedy. The next point mentions arranged marriages. During the Restoration period, many marriages were arranged by families. Parents often chose husbands and wives based on wealth, property, or social status, rather than love. Dryden questions this practice. He suggests that marriage without love often leads to unhappiness. This criticism remains meaningful even today. Next, the slide mentions double entendres. This is a famous literary device. A double entendre is a sentence with two meanings. One meaning is obvious. The second meaning is hidden. Often the hidden meaning creates humor. For example, someone may make a perfectly polite statement, but another listener understands a second, clever meaning. Restoration audiences greatly enjoyed this kind of intelligent wordplay. The next feature is sparkling prose. Unlike the serious plot, which uses heroic couplets, the comic plot is written mainly in prose. Why? Because prose sounds natural. It resembles everyday conversation. This makes the witty dialogue sound realistic and lively. Dryden carefully chooses different styles for different kinds of stories. The slide also mentions two important characters, Rodeful and Doralus. They belong to the comic storyline. Through their conversations, their misunderstandings, their flirtation, and the clever arguments, Dryden exposes the strengths and weaknesses of fashionable Restoration society. They entertain the audience, but they also encourage the audience to think about love, marriage, and human behavior. The synthesis. Now let us understand the most important sentence on the slide. It says, the plots exist in entirely separate worlds but unite thematically to condemn arranged marriages, showcasing Dryden's absolute mastery of variety. This sentence explains Dryden's artistic genius. At first, the two stories seem completely independent. One deals with princes, kingdoms, and romance. The other deals with fashionable gentlemen, ladies, and witty conversations. The settings, characters, and language are different. Yet both stories finally teach the same lesson. Both show that marriage should be based on love, mutual understanding, and personal choice, not merely on family pressure, politics, or money. Dryden reaches the same conclusion in two different ways. One through romance and emotion, the other through comedy and satire. That is why this play is admired for its remarkable dramatic construction. Bringing everything together, Marriage à la mode proves that Dryden was not limited to one style of writing. He could write romantic adventure, serious political drama, social comedy, and witty dialogue, all within a single play. He understood that audiences enjoy variety. Some people enjoy romance, others enjoy humor, still others enjoy political intrigue. Dryden successfully gives them all three. Yet despite this variety, he never loses his central message. That is why this play remains one of the finest examples of Restoration dramatic craftsmanship. For UGC NET, SET, PGTRB, GATE, and MAR English entrance examinations, remember these key points. Marriage à la mode was published in 1672. It is famous for its split plot structure, combining a tragicomedy and a comedy of manners. The tragicomedy features idealistic romantic love, usurpers, lost nobles, heroic couplets, and strong influence from John Fletcher's tragicomic tradition. The comedy of manners features fashionable society, cynical and witty characters, arranged marriages, double entendres, sparkling prose, and characters such as Rodeful and Doralus. Although the two plots remain separate, both ultimately criticize arranged marriages without genuine love. The play is celebrated as one of the best examples of Dryden's mastery of dramatic variety, proving that he could successfully unite different dramatic forms while maintaining a single central theme. Now let us move away from Dryden's plays and study one of his greatest historical poems. The title of this slide is Statecraft and Myth-Making, Annus Mirabilis, 1667. This poem is important because it shows another side of Dryden. Until now, we have studied him as a critic, a dramatist, and a literary thinker. Now we shall see him as a national poet. He writes not merely to entertain people but to encourage an entire nation during a difficult period of history. The Latin title Annus Mirabilis means, the Year of Wonders. Why was the year considered wonderful? Because England experienced terrible disasters but also remarkable achievements. Despite war, destruction, and the Great Fire of London, England survived and emerged stronger. Dryden believed these events proved that God had a special purpose for England. Let us understand every part of the slide. The occasion. The first section is the occasion. Every great literary work has a reason for being written. The occasion for Annus Mirabilis was the remarkable events of 1666. Two major events dominate the poem. The first is the English naval victories against the Dutch during the Second Anglo-Dutch War. England depended greatly on sea trade. Control of the sea meant wealth, commerce, and national power. When the English navy won important battles, people felt proud of their country. Dryden celebrates these victories and presents England as a rising maritime nation. The second major event is the Great Fire of London in 1666. This was one of the most devastating disasters in English history. The fire destroyed thousands of houses, churches, shops, and public buildings. Large parts of London were reduced to ashes. Many people lost everything they owned. It seemed as if the nation itself had been destroyed. But instead of presenting only destruction, Dryden presents hope. He praises King Charles II for his courage, leadership, and calm behavior during the crisis. According to Dryden, a great leader does not abandon his people during disaster. He stands with them, encourages them, and helps them rebuild. Thus, the poem becomes not only a record of historical events but also a celebration of national resilience. The form. Now let us move to the second section. The slide says, written entirely in quatrains, heroic stanzas. What does this mean? A quatrain is simply a stanza containing 4 lines. Dryden wrote the entire poem using these 4-line stanzas. These are often called heroic stanzas because they suit serious historical and national subjects. Each stanza follows a regular rhyme scheme. The orderly structure gives the poem balance, discipline, and dignity. Why did Dryden choose this form? Because he wanted the poem to sound formal and majestic. A national poem celebrating England's achievements required a grand and controlled style. The carefully organized stanzas also reflect the neoclassical belief in order, balance, symmetry, and artistic discipline. The ideology. Now we come to the most challenging but most important part of the slide. It is called the ideology. First, let us understand the word ideology. An ideology is a set of beliefs or ideas about society, government, politics, or human life. Every writer has certain beliefs that influence his writing. Dryden's poem reflects the political beliefs of Restoration England. The slide first mentions bourgeois imperialism. This may sound difficult, but let us simplify it. The word bourgeois refers to the growing middle class, especially merchants, traders, and businessmen. The word imperialism refers to expanding a nation's power through trade, colonies, and military strength. Together, the expression suggests that England's commercial success and overseas expansion were viewed as signs of national greatness. Dryden presents England as a nation whose growing naval power and commerce will lead to prosperity. The sea becomes not merely a place of war but also a source of wealth and national progress. The slide then says, mythologizes the king as divine providence. What does this mean? To mythologize someone means to present that person as larger than ordinary life, almost like a legendary hero. Dryden presents King Charles II not simply as a political ruler, but almost as a person chosen by God to guide England through crisis. This does not mean Charles II was actually divine. Rather, Dryden's poetry elevates his image to inspire confidence and loyalty among the people. This was common in royal literature of the Restoration period. The slide also says, exalting the laboring shipbuilders to heroic stature. This is another interesting feature. Dryden does not praise only the king. He also praises ordinary workers. The people who built England's ships, repaired the navy, and worked tirelessly for the country's success are described as heroes. This shows that national greatness depends not only on kings and generals, but also on the hard work of ordinary citizens. In this way, Dryden honors both leadership and labor. The goal. Now let us study the final section. The slide says, stifle domestic dissent by rallying the divided nation around war and commerce. Let us understand this carefully. After years of civil war, political conflict, and religious divisions, England was deeply divided. Different groups disagreed about politics, religion, and the monarchy. Dryden wanted to encourage national unity. Instead of focusing on internal disagreements, he encouraged people to unite around common national achievements. The victories at sea, the rebuilding of London, and the growth of trade became symbols of hope. In other words, Dryden's poem tries to replace division with patriotism. It reminds people that they belong to one nation and share one future. Bringing everything together, let us now connect all the ideas. Annus Mirabilis is much more than a historical poem. It is a poem about hope after disaster, national courage, leadership, hard work, and faith in England's future. Dryden transforms real historical events into an inspiring national story. Instead of describing only suffering, he shows how courage, unity, and determination can overcome even the greatest challenges. That is why the poem is called The Year of Wonders. The wonders are not miracles in the supernatural sense. The real wonder is the strength and resilience of a nation that survives war, fire, and destruction. For UGC NET, SET, PGTRB, GATE, and MAR English entrance examinations, remember these important points. Annus Mirabilis was published in 1667, though it celebrates the remarkable events of 1666, and its Latin title means, The Year of Wonders. The poem celebrates English naval victories during the Second Anglo-Dutch War and King Charles II's leadership during the Great Fire of London. It is written entirely in heroic stanzas, also called quatrains, reflecting neoclassical order and discipline. The poem presents England as a growing maritime and commercial power, reflecting the ideology of bourgeois imperialism. Dryden mythologizes King Charles II as a providential ruler while also honoring the shipbuilders and ordinary workers who contributed to England's strength. The poem seeks to unite a politically divided nation by encouraging patriotism, confidence, and support for national rebuilding and commerce. Through Annus Mirabilis, Dryden demonstrates that poetry can do more than describe history. It can inspire courage, strengthen national identity, preserve important events for future generations, and transform historical reality into a lasting vision of hope and renewal. Now we come to one of the greatest political poems in English literature. The title of this slide is The Allegorical Relational Map, Absalom and Achitophel, 1681. If someone asks, which is Dryden's greatest political satire, the answer is immediately Absalom and Achitophel, published in 1681. This poem is important because Dryden combines history, politics, the Bible, satire, and poetry into one remarkable work. To understand this poem, we must first understand one important literary term. That term is allegory. What is an allegory? An allegory is a story in which the characters represent real people, real events, or real political situations. In other words, the names in the poem are not the real names of historical people. Instead, Dryden borrows characters from the Bible and uses them to represent politicians living in his own time. Why did he do this? Because allegory allows a writer to discuss dangerous political issues indirectly. Instead of openly attacking politicians, Dryden tells a biblical story. His readers immediately understand the hidden political meaning. This makes the poem both artistic and politically powerful. The context. Now let us begin with the blue box at the top. It says, written during the Exclusion Crisis to defend Charles II and patrilineal succession against the Whigs. This sentence contains several important examination terms. Let us understand them one by one. First, the Exclusion Crisis. During the late 1670s and early 1680s, England faced a serious political problem. King Charles II had no legitimate children. Many people feared that after his death, his Catholic brother, James, would become king. The Whig Party wanted to prevent this. They tried to pass a law excluding James from the throne. This political conflict became known as the Exclusion Crisis. Dryden strongly opposed this movement. He believed that the rightful heir should inherit the throne according to law. This principle is called patrilineal succession. The word patrilineal simply means that royal authority passes through the family line, especially from father to son or to the lawful heir. Dryden believed that changing this order would create political chaos. Therefore, he wrote Absalom and Achitophel to defend the lawful monarchy. The allegory. Now let us study the left column. These are the biblical characters. Each one represents a real historical person. Let us examine them one by one. David as Charles II. The first character is King David. In the Bible, David is the great king of Israel. He is chosen by God, but he is not a perfect man. He has personal weaknesses, yet he remains God's anointed king. Dryden compares David to King Charles II. Notice what the slide says. Charles II was promiscuous but divinely anointed. This means Dryden admits that Charles had many personal faults. Historically, Charles II had several mistresses and many illegitimate children. Dryden does not hide these weaknesses. However, he argues that a king's private imperfections do not destroy his legitimate right to rule. In Dryden's view, Charles remains the lawful king chosen to govern England. This balanced portrayal is one of the strengths of the poem. Absalom as Duke of Monmouth. The next character is Absalom. In the Bible, Absalom is King David's handsome and popular son. Unfortunately, he rebels against his own father and tries to seize the throne. Dryden compares Absalom with the Duke of Monmouth. Monmouth was Charles II's illegitimate son. Many people wanted Monmouth to become king instead of James. Dryden presents Monmouth sympathetically. Notice the description on the slide. He is noble but misguided. This is important. Dryden does not describe him as evil. Instead, he suggests that Monmouth is a good young man who has been influenced by dangerous advisors. His greatest mistake is allowing ambition to overcome loyalty. Achitophel as Earl of Shaftesbury. Now we come to the central villain of the poem. Achitophel. In the Bible, Achitophel is a clever counselor who encourages Absalom's rebellion. Dryden compares him with the Earl of Shaftesbury. Shaftesbury was one of the leading supporters of excluding James from the throne. Dryden presents him as the satanic tempter and false counselor. Notice that Dryden attacks not only his politics, but also his ability to manipulate others. According to Dryden, Monmouth would never have rebelled without Shaftesbury's influence. Thus, Achitophel represents dangerous political ambition disguised as wise advice. This brilliant character portrait is considered one of the greatest achievements in English satire. Shimei as Slingsby Bethel. Next we have Shimei. In the Bible, Shimei insults King David publicly. Dryden compares him with Slingsby Bethel. The slide calls him a hypocritical Puritan. Dryden criticizes those who publicly claim to be morally perfect while secretly acting with political selfishness. Through Shimei, Dryden satirizes religious hypocrisy. Korah as Titus Oates. Finally, we come to Korah. Korah was a biblical rebel against God's chosen leadership. Dryden compares him with Titus Oates. Titus Oates became famous for inventing the false popish plot. He falsely claimed that Catholics planned to murder King Charles II. His fabricated story created fear throughout England. Many innocent people suffered because of these false accusations. Therefore, Dryden presents Korah as a perjured liar whose false testimony threatens the entire nation. Why did Dryden use biblical characters? Now you may ask, why didn't Dryden simply use the real names? There are several reasons. First, the Bible was familiar to almost every educated reader. Everyone immediately understood the references. Second, biblical stories carried moral authority. Readers naturally compared the politicians with the biblical counterparts. Third, allegory allowed Dryden to criticize political leaders in a creative and artistic way. Instead of writing ordinary political propaganda, he created lasting literature. That is why Absalom and Achitophel remains a masterpiece even today. Bringing everything together, let us now connect all these ideas. Dryden transforms contemporary English politics into a timeless biblical drama. King Charles II becomes King David. Monmouth becomes Absalom. Shaftesbury becomes Achitophel. Political conflict becomes moral conflict. The poem is therefore much more than political commentary. It becomes a universal story about loyalty, ambition, leadership, temptation, rebellion, and legitimate authority. That is the power of allegory. It allows temporary political events to become permanent literature. Examination revision. For UGC NET, SET, PGTRB, GATE, and MAR English entrance examinations. Remember these important facts. Absalom and Achitophel was published in 1681 and is John Dryden's greatest political satire. The poem was written during the Exclusion Crisis to defend King Charles II, hereditary succession, and the monarchy against the Whigs. It is a political allegory, using biblical characters to represent contemporary English political figures. David represents King Charles II, the lawful but personally imperfect monarch. Absalom represents the Duke of Monmouth, Charles II's illegitimate son, portrayed as noble but misguided. Achitophel represents the Earl of Shaftesbury, depicted as the false counsellor and chief instigator of rebellion. Shimei represents Slingsby Bethel, symbolizing religious hypocrisy. Cora represents Titus Oates, the architect of the false popish plot, symbolizing deception and false witness. Through Absalom and Achitophel, Dryden demonstrates how poetry can become a powerful instrument of political thought. By transforming real political events into biblical allegory, he created a work that is not only a defense of the monarchy but also one of the greatest examples of political satire in the history of English literature.